What happens when a quiet cybersecurity analyst becomes the target of an arrogant CEO in front of the entire office? You won't believe how her calm reaction and one precise move can turn the aggressor's career upside down in the most unexpected way. Before we continue, please let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your opinion inspires us to do better. The air in the Axis Dynamics Command Center was so thick it felt like you could cut it with a knife. The New York office on the 42nd floor of 37th Street was filled with air-conditioned coolness and the quiet hum of servers processing millions of transactions every second. Stock index charts flickered on wide monitors, their blue and green lines casting ghostly shadows on the faces of the assembled managers. Sofia Danilova stood near the main screen, her hands clasped behind her back, her gaze fixed on the analytics panel. She was tracking a strange anomaly in the data stream, a barely noticeable fluctuation that could indicate an impending hacker attack on the system. Her focus was absolute, the result of 20 years of working in cybersecurity. It was that very silence that others often mistook for absence. Victor Hunter, the executive director of operations, entered the room with the noise that always accompanied his arrival. He was a man carved from sweeping ambitions and resounding victories. His Armani suit was slightly taut around his shoulders, and he moved as if the entire office were his personal property. His eyes, accustomed to scanning for conventional threats, slid past Sofia as if she were part of the office furniture. "Report!" he snapped, his voice a hoarse announcement addressed to the entire room, but directed at senior analyst Michael Stone, who was watching silently from his desk. The junior specialist, a young man named Jason, began to report. His voice trembled with excitement. "Sir, we're monitoring anomalous signals in Sector 7's security system. The pattern suggests a polymorphic attack, possibly from outside. The algorithm changes every few seconds." Hunter snorted, the sound like scraping stones. "Polymorphic? Son, that's just noise from trading algorithms. I've seen it hundreds of times. It's background noise. Give me a real threat." Sofia didn't move, but when she spoke, her voice cut through the hum of the servers. It was quiet, but carried the weight of confidence. "Victor, with all due respect, the delay between changes is too consistent to be commercial interference. The frequency is machine-controlled. It's not noise. It's a targeting system preparing an attack on our payment gateways." The room froze. The graphs on the screens seemed frozen in place. Hunter slowly turned his head, and his gaze finally settled on Sofia. He saw a woman of medium height, her dark hair pulled back into a strict bun. He saw the silver senior analyst badge on her blazer, but his brain registered it as an administrative detail, not a sign of command authority. He saw her stillness, but perceived it not as discipline, but as timidity. He approached her, his footsteps echoing loudly on the polished parquet floor. He picked up a glass of ice water from the table next to the projector. "Sofia," he began, his voice dripping with condescension. "In my company, we don't chase shadows. We identify real threats. We act concretely. We don't get distracted by static." He gestured with the glass, water splashing over the edge. Sofia's expression remained unchanged. She met his gaze directly. "The threat is real, Victor. The signal is a harbinger. It's the whisper before the scream." Hunter's face tightened. He perceived her refusal to blush as a direct challenge to his authority over his subordinates and senior management. He needed to reassert his dominance, and in his world, that required a spectacle. "Let me cool you down, Sofia," he said, his voice turning into a low hiss. "You seem to be getting too excited." With a deliberate, almost theatrical movement, he tipped the glass over. Icy water crashed onto her head, soaking the collar of her white blouse and dripping down her chin onto the immaculate parquet floor. Ice cubes clattered to her feet. Several junior staff members gasped. Others looked away, their expressions a mixture of shock and embarrassment. Michael Stone's jaw clenched like granite, but he remained silent, watching. Sofia Danilova didn't flinch. She didn't wipe the water from her face. She simply stood there, water dripping from her eyelashes, but her posture remained unbroken. The only change was a slight narrowing of her eyes, a shift from passive observation to active recording. She was documenting a breach of protocol, an insult, a public humiliation. Her mind cataloged the witnesses, the time on the clock on the wall, the exact words spoken aloud. She was a censor, and the data was now stored. Hunter grinned, placing the empty glass back on the table with a loud thud. That's it. Clarity. He turned his back to her, addressing the entire room again. Well, let's get back to searching for something that really matters. Sophia remained in her place for another 30 seconds. Her presence was a silent, dripping reproach to the director's theatrical performance. Then, without uttering a word, she turned sharply and walked out of the command center. The wet sound of her shoes on the floor was the only sound that followed her. She walked down the hallway, the cool fabric of her blouse clinging to her skin. She ignored the averted glances and hurried whispers that followed her. Emotions were a luxury, a distorting variable in a complex equation. Anger was noise. Humiliation was a subjective interpretation. Events in the command center were data points, an unprofessional act, a failure of leadership, a violation of corporate ethics. The problem demanded a solution, not a reaction. Her destination was a small, secure conference room tucked away behind the main server room. The air here was even colder, smelling of ozone and clean electricity. She sat down at a secure terminal reserved for confidential information, her fingers, still damp, moving across the keyboard with practiced economy. She opened a new file, an official report. The format was standard, but its contents were anything but ordinary. She didn't write about disrespect or hurt feelings. She wrote with the sterile precision of an internal memo. Subject: Violation of corporate ethics and work policy. Reported by Sofia Danilova, Senior Cybersecurity Analyst, ID 755912. Reporting. Subject: Victor Hunter, Executive Director of Operations. Time: 14:32 p.m., November 21st. Location: Command Center, Axis Dynamics Office, 42nd floor, 37th Street, New York City. Witnesses: see attached list of employees present for the 14 p.m. to 10 p.m. shift. Summary of events. At 14:32 p.m., during an operational briefing regarding anomalous signals in the security system, Executive Director Victor Hunter challenged the analysis presented by the reporter. After a brief verbal altercation, Victor Hunter intentionally poured a glass of ice water on the reporter, in the presence of command center personnel. Verbatim quote from Victor Hunter before the action. "Let me cool you down, Sophia. You seem to be getting a little too excited." Verbatim quote after the action. "There you go. Clarity." She paused, rereading the text. It was dry, factual, and irrefutable. There was no mention of her own condition, no interpretation of his motives. It was a simple, declarative statement of the facts. She attached a list of the employees present, a list of over 20 names, including Michael Stone. She had digitally signed it with a corporate security token, the timestamp recording it as sent at 14:48, just 16 minutes after the incident. She didn't send it to HR or the legal director's office. She sent it directly to a secure digital document archive, a silent, uncontrolled vault where it would exist as a permanent, verifiable record. It was a digital missile, invisible for now, but ready to be lit when needed. Proof. A chain of events. These are the foundations of redress. The report was filed. She stood up and walked out of the conference room. Her blouse was still damp, a cold reminder of the public spectacle. But inside, her system was calm. The first step of the procedure was complete. She had documented the first hit. Now she would watch and wait until the system either corrected itself or introduced another variable. She didn't return to her office. Instead, she took the path that led to the far side of the building, to a small, unassuming fitness center humming with the sound of treadmills and weight machines. The air inside was thick with the smell of rubber and sweat. This was her sanctuary, a place of pressure and silence. She grabbed her gym bag from her locker and changed into her workout clothes with methodical movements. She didn't speak to the trainer, an older man named Eric, who had run the gym for 20 years. He simply nodded, his eyes lingering briefly on her still damp hair. He'd already heard the whispers. He knew her well enough to understand that her presence here wasn't about escape, but about recalibration. She approached the punching bag, a heavy leather implement hanging on chains in the corner of the room. The first blow was short, testing. Then came others, rhythmic, precise, each blow sending a dull ripple through the bag. She didn't strike with fury. She struck with calculation, refining her technique, calibrating her power. The world around her, the noise, the politics, the ego, dissolved in the rhythm of her breathing. Here, in this simple, straightforward action, she recalibrated. She replayed the incident in the command center not as a memory, but as a tactical task. Hunter's actions were a probe, an attempt to find a weakness. He expected an emotional reaction, tears, anger, a complaint to a higher-up. Any of these reactions would fit into his narrative of an overly sensitive, hysterical employee who couldn't handle the pressures of a real work environment. Her lack of reaction clearly confused him. It was an anomaly in his data set. She knew with cold certainty that he wouldn't let it go. His ego was bruised by her quiet defiance, her refusal to break or even appear outwardly upset. He would escalate. He would interpret her silence and procedural response as weakness. Confirmation that he had won the fight. He would need to press harder to cement his dominance. The next confrontation would be more direct. He would seek to provoke the reaction he failed to elicit the first time. She regulated her breathing, slowing her heart rate. She thought about the emblem of her old team, the specialized cyber intelligence group, Phoenix. Their motto was faith through static. It was about finding signals in the noise, about trusting data when all sensory input suggested chaos. She was in the dark now, institutionally speaking. But she had faith in the procedure. She had laid the foundation stone of evidence. After an hour of working with the bag, she stopped. Sweat streamed down her face, replacing the cold water from the command center with another liquid. The liquid of her own control. She handed the boxing gloves back to Eric. "Is everything okay, Sophia?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. "Yes, Eric," she replied. "The correction is in progress." He simply nodded, his expression unreadable, and began removing his gloves. He knew the process had begun, and his job was to stay out of its way. 2 days passed. The office operated in a tense, unspoken truce. Whispers followed Sophia into the cafeteria, a place she now frequented with deliberate calm. Some looked at her with pity, others with a hidden contempt that mirrored Hunter's. They saw a victim who refused to fight back. Sophia ignored them all, eating her lunches with the same focused purposefulness with which she studied technical schematics. James Collins, the assistant to the general manager, sat down with her on the second day. He was a good man, a lawyer by training, who understood that the most direct course wasn't always the best. "The CEO knows what happens, Sophia," he said, lowering his voice. "He's watching." "Observation is a valid tactical choice," Sophia replied, without looking up from her plate. "Hunter's spinning this," Collins continued with disappointment. "He's telling everyone he was just joking, trying to ease a tense employee's nerves. He's making you look fragile. The enemy's perception is a valuable intelligence asset," she said, finally meeting his gaze. Her gaze was steady, devoid of the anger he expected to see. "It reveals their strategy. Their strategy is to transfer you out of this office until the next operational cycle. He's already submitted a formal request to the CEO citing your lack of team spirit." This was the escalation she'd predicted, a formal accusation, a step toward her removal from the board entirely. She took a slow sip of water. "His request will require documentation. He's fabricating it. He's forcing his sycophants to write statements about your lack of communication and inability to integrate with the team." Sophia put down her fork. "Thanks for the information, James." Her tone was calm, final. The conversation was over. She had the information she needed. The provocation came that same evening. Sophia was in a quiet corridor connecting the main offices with the analytics wing. She was reviewing network traffic data on a secure tablet, her focus absolute. The corridor was narrow, lined with cable trays and junction boxes. Victor Hunter appeared at the far end of the corridor, accompanied by his 2 closest managers, a man named Robert and a woman named Sandra. They blocked the exit. It was a classic intimidation tactic. Overwhelm with physical presence, cut off any escape routes. Hunter had a smug smirk on his face. He'd heard she hadn't filed a complaint or whined to the CEO. He'd won. Now it was time to seal the deal. "Sophia!" he boomed, his voice echoing in the confined space. "Exactly the employee I wanted to see. We need to talk about your performance evaluation." Sophia didn't look up from her tablet. "This is not the right time or place for this discussion, Victor." "Oh, I think that's appropriate," Hunter said, taking a step closer. The other two employees parted slightly, a practiced, threatening stance. "You see, I'm concerned about your attitude. It's rigid, inflexible. You don't seem like a team player." He was now standing directly in front of her, his shadow falling on the tablet. She still didn't look up. "My job is to ensure accurate analysis of security threats. This job is intact." Hunter's smirk vanished. This wasn't the reaction he wanted. He needed fear or anger. He needed a scene he could exploit. He reached down and snatched the tablet from her hands. "Your function is to do as you are told, Sophia, and to show due respect." Sophia slowly raised her head. Her eyes were flat, her expression unreadable. "Return the corporate property, Victor." "Or what?" he chuckled, holding the tablet out of her reach. "Run to the general? You had your chance. You didn't do anything. That's because you know your place." He took another step forward, invading her personal space, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You know you're just a check mark on a diversity list, a checkbox. You don't belong here." This was his final mistake. He misinterpreted her silence as weakness, her procedural nature as fear. He saw the woman. He failed to see the weapon. He reached out, intending to grab her arm to physically dominate her and complete the humiliation. The moment his fingers touched the sleeve of her blazer, the world shifted on its axis. It happened in less time than it took the two employees accompanying him to process the movement. This wasn't a fight. It was a physical problem solved with mathematical precision. Sophia didn't hit him. She moved with him. As his hand closed on hers, she pivoted on the ball of her left foot, using his own forward momentum. Her right hand rose, not to block, but as a guide, gripping his elbow. It was a controlled, non-invasive grip that heightened his sense of disorientation. His own momentum carried him face first toward the solid steel wall of the corridor. His two subordinates, Robert and Sandra, watched in stunned disbelief, their brains still catching up with the motion blur. They watched as their imposing director, a man weighing 105 kilograms of muscle, suddenly transformed into a hulking projectile. Just before his face would have smashed into the wall, Sophia completed her turn. She released her grip, and her hands moved to his torso and head. It wasn't an act of aggression. It was an act of afterthought. She softened his impact, but his trajectory remained unchanged. His heavy body, now completely horizontal, hit the floor. The impact was a thunderous, wet, heavy sound that echoed down the hallway. His head bounced back once, his eyes rolling back in his head. He was unconscious before he stopped moving. The entire sequence, from his touch to him passing out on the floor, took less than 3 seconds. Sophia immediately knelt beside him. Her hands moved to his neck, checking for a pulse. She tilted his head back, making sure his airway was clear. Her movements were clinical, the practiced movements of a certified first aid specialist. She was no longer the adversary. She was a first responder. Robert and Sandra watched, their mouths slightly open. They had come to see a dressing down. They had just witnessed a masterclass in controlled power. They saw their director, the man they considered the pinnacle of corporate masculinity, lying unconscious at the feet of the quiet, unassuming analyst he was stalking. Sophia looked at them, her expression as calm as it had been in the command center. "He's breathing. His pulse is steady. He'll need a medical evaluation for a possible concussion. One of you will call an ambulance. The other will secure this area. This is now a potential incident site." Her voice, devoid of triumph or panic, broke their paralysis. Sandra grabbed her phone. Robert simply stared at her. A new and terrifying understanding dawned in his eyes. He saw her for the first time, not as a woman or an analyst, but as a force governed by a set of rules he couldn't comprehend. James Collins was the first management-level employee to arrive, followed by 2 security guards. He found Sophia standing calmly next to Hunter's still unconscious body, her tablet back in her hand. The 2 employees gave halting, contradictory statements to the security staff. "Sophia," Collins said, his voice tense with worry. An incident occurred, James, Sophia stated, her voice even. Victor Hunter initiated physical contact. I responded with minimal, non-lethal force to neutralize the immediate threat. He lost consciousness due to the subsequent fall. I rendered aid and secured the scene. I recommend that all parties be formally interviewed and that all security footage in this corridor be retained as evidence. Collins looked from her calm face to the director's bulky figure on the floor. He saw the precise, almost surgical nature of the situation. There was no rage here, no loss of control. This was the result of calculated action. He nodded slowly, his mind already working through the procedural maze that was about to descend upon them. I understand, Sophia, he said, his tone changing from personal concern to professional duty. He turned to the security guards. Secure this entire corridor, no one in or out. Get statements from everyone present. Sophia, you'll come with me. As they were leaving, a medical team arrived with a stretcher. The whispers had already begun to change. The narrative of the fragile analyst was evaporating, replaced by a confused and frightened muttering. They had all misjudged her. They had mistaken the quiet hum of a high-performance engine for silence. They had just seen her reach the red line. The institutional gears began to turn slowly and with immense friction. A formal investigation was launched, prompted by the simple fact that the executive director had been incapacitated by a subordinate. Hunter, once he regained consciousness and was treated for a mild concussion, immediately went on the offensive. He and his 2 employees filed sworn statements alleging a brutal, unprovoked attack. Their narrative was a work of fiction, portraying Sophia as an emotionally unstable employee who snapped under pressure. They claimed she ambushed the director, screaming incoherently before attacking him with shocking ferocity. They counted on the weight of the director's word against the analyst, on an ingrained cultural bias that would find their version of events more plausible. Sophia was temporarily relieved of her duties and confined to her desk pending the investigation's results. She didn't protest. She obeyed every order and answered every question posed to her by the legal affairs investigators. Her own statement was a marvel of brevity and precision. It was almost identical to the verbal account she gave James Collins in the hallway. It contained no emotion, no speculation, only a sequence of events described in the language of physics and procedure. The investigators, a corporate lawyer named Catherine, and an outside security consultant named Martin, were skeptical. Hunter's story was dramatic and compelling. Sophia's was sterile and, in their view, suspiciously detached. The weight of institutional momentum was on Hunter's side. On the 3rd day of the investigation, the CEO, a man named Roger Benson, summoned the lead investigators to his office. James Collins was present, standing quietly by the picture window. "What did you find?" Benson asked, his voice a low baritone that brooked no evasiveness. Catherine, the lead investigator, cleared her throat. "Sir, the sworn statements from the director and his staff are consistent. They paint a clear picture of an unprovoked attack. But Sofia Danilova's testimony, her statement, is unusual, sir. It's clinical, almost robotic. She admits to the use of force but frames it as a procedural response. Frankly, sir, it lacks credibility." Roger Benson folded his fingers together, his gaze unblinking. Credibility, an interesting concept. Does evidence matter more than credibility, Catherine? Or does the narrative that feels right take precedence? "Evidence is paramount, sir," Martin interjected. "But the only evidence other than testimony is the security footage, and that's problematic." "Show me," Benson commanded. Collins pressed a command on the console, and a large screen on the wall lit up. It showed a camera view of the hallway from a high angle. The footage was clear. It showed Sophia scrolling through her tablet. It showed Hunter and his men closing in, blocking her exit. The audio was too faint to be clear, but the body language was not. Hunter's aggression, his invasion of her space, his snatching of the tablet, his final, fateful touch on her hand. It was all there. Then came the twist. The investigators watched, their expressions veering from skepticism to disbelief. They saw a smooth, effortless redirection of force. They saw Hunter fall not from the blow, but from his own misplaced momentum. They saw Sophia immediately kneel to render aid. The footage didn't show a hysterical woman breaking down. It showed a surgeon removing the threat with calm precision. The entire event matched Sophia's sterile, robotic account precisely. It completely contradicted Hunter's testimony. That, Roger Benson said into the stunned silence, is what credibility looks like. It's the correlation of fact with testimony. He turned to Collins. James, is there anything else? Yes, sir, Collins replied. He brought up another file on the screen. This one was filed in the secure recording archive by Sofia Danilova 2 days before the incident in the hallway. Sophia's initial report of the incident in the command center appeared on the screen. The date and timestamp were clear. A dry, factual account of Hunter pouring water on her, complete with verbatim quotes, was displayed in stark black and white text. Catherine read it, her face turning pale. She documented the first incident before the second happened. She established a pattern of behavior. She created a chain of events for his inappropriate behavior, Benson clarified, his voice as cold as deep space. She didn't escalate. She didn't complain. She documented. Then, when she was physically threatened, she responded with a degree of force so precisely calibrated, it was a work of art. She protected herself while ensuring he wasn't seriously injured. She did everything right. Martin looked from the screen at the CEO. Sir, this changes the entire scope of the investigation. No, Martin. Benson corrected him gently. It doesn't change the scope. It completes it. You now have your evidence. I expect your final report on my desk by 6 o'clock. A report that reflects the truth shown on this screen. Not a story told by a man whose ego writes checks his body can't cash. The formal hearing was convened not as a disciplinary action against Sofia Danilova, but as a disciplinary hearing for Victor Hunter. The venue was the main conference room, the same room where larger strategic decisions were made. The room was packed. Roger Benson made attendance mandatory for all employees, senior and junior, from every department in the office. He wanted it to be a lesson. Sofia sat at a small table off to the side, dressed in an impeccable business suit. She was accompanied by a lawyer from the legal department, who barely spoke to her. Her evidence spoke for itself. Hunter sat at another table, his face a thunderous mask of indignation. His 2 employees sat behind him, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. Roger Benson presided. He wasted no time on theatrics. We're here to address a profound failure of leadership and character, he began, his voice filling the silent room. For days, this office has been consumed by rumors and false narratives concerning an incident between 2 employees. We will now deal with the facts. He ordered the security camera feed from the hallway to be shown on the main screen for all to see. The room was completely silent as they watched the smooth, shocking suppression. They saw Hunter's aggression and Sofia's calm, controlled response. Then Benson ordered Sofia's first report, the one about the water incident in the command center, to be displayed. He read her brief, factual summary aloud. He let the words hang in the air. Victor Hunter, Benson said, his eyes locked on the man. You were presented with a tactical analysis from a subject matter expert. You refused. Instead of engaging in a discussion of the data, you chose to humiliate the employee who presented it. Then you compounded that failure by physically intimidating and ultimately assaulting the same employee days later. When your assault failed, you and your subordinates conspired to file false official reports to destroy her career. At every turn, you chose ego over duty, arrogance over honor. You disgraced this company, and you failed every employee under your command. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. You are hereby found guilty of misconduct, assault, and making a false statement. You are relieved of your duties, effective immediately. You will receive a formal letter of reprimand, which will be placed in your permanent file, effectively ending your career with this company. You will be assigned to an administrative-level position in our Cleveland office, pending your mandatory termination. Your employees will face their own disciplinary action for their complicity. He then turned his attention to the gathered crowd. Let this be a lesson to every person in this room. Competence is not defined by loudness. Strength is not demonstrated by bragging, and restraint is not a sign of weakness. It is the highest form of discipline. Sofia Danilova acted with a level of professionalism and control under extreme provocation. That should be the standard for all of us. He looked straight at Sophia. Sophia, you are fully exonerated and reinstated. Your report of the security anomalies in Sector 7, the one that started this whole thing, proved accurate. A dedicated team, acting on your initial analysis, detected and neutralized a planned hacker attack on our payment gateways. Your analysis saved the company from millions in losses. Your behavior provided a much-needed course correction for the culture of this office. Then he stood, a clear signal that the hearing was over. As the room began to stir, a remarkable thing happened. The young officer, the one who had been in the command center during the first incident, stood up. He turned to face Sophia, stood at attention, and gave a slow, perfect salute. Then another officer did the same, and then another. Soon, every officer in the room was on their feet, saluting her. It was a silent, powerful apology, a spontaneous ritual of respect. Sophia stood up, her face betraying no emotion, and returned the salute to the entire room. She held it for a moment, then lowered her hand, turned, and walked out. Later that evening, she was back at the fitness center. She wasn't on the treadmill this time, but carefully cleaning and checking her boxing gloves, her hands moving with their usual grace. Eric worked beside her in comfortable silence. He reached into a cabinet and pulled out a small embroidered patch. He slid it across the workbench toward her. It was a black circle, and in the center was a stylized phoenix. Its wings were spread wide, embroidered with silver and gold threads. Around the bird were the words, "Faith through static." A slight variation on her old team's motto. Not faith in the darkness, but faith amidst the static. The general thought your old motto was a bit outdated, Eric shouted, not looking at her. He decided this one was more accurate. Sophia took the patch. She ran her thumb over the intricate embroidery of a phoenix, the emblem of rebirth from the ashes. It was a sign, a silent acknowledgement of what she had endured and how she had triumphed. It was a signal that the system, for all its flaws, could sometimes correct itself. She nodded once, a gesture of gratitude deeper than words, and slipped the patch into her pocket. The restoration was complete. The door to the fitness center swung open, and James Collins walked in. He was holding a tablet. He approached the area where they were working, his expression full of quiet respect. "Sophia," he said, "a new assignment from the Cyber Intelligence Department." Sophia looked up from her work, her eyes already focused on the next mission. The events of the past week were now just a locked file, a data point in a long career. The room seemed quieter now. The office culture had subtly but irreversibly changed. The loud, corrosive noise of Hunter's command style had been filtered out, replaced by a cleaner signal. She took the tablet from Collins, her gaze already scanning the preliminary intelligence. A new threat. A new pattern. A hacker group, believed to be operating out of Eastern Europe, was targeting several major financial corporations in the United States. Their methods were sophisticated. Polymorphic algorithms, multi-stage attacks through fake servers, and the use of artificial intelligence to bypass security systems. They had already hacked 2 mid-sized companies, stealing millions of dollars and confidential client information. Axis Dynamics was on the list of next targets. "I see," Sophia said, her voice calm and collected. Collins paused for a moment, then said, "What you did meant something to all of us." Sophia's eyes never left the screen. She absorbed new data, a new problem, the next equation to solve. She rested her hand on the new patch in her pocket, the Phoenix emblem, a small, hard weight against her palm. The past was archived. The future was loading. "Correction achieved," she said. But the work was never done. In the world of cyber threats, there was no respite, no final victories. There were only battles won, one after another. Constant vigilance against those who sought to destroy order for profit or chaos. Sophia returned to her office in the command center the next morning. Her workstation was just as she'd left it, save for a small stack of letters on her desk. Her colleagues greeted her with nods, some with respectful smiles, others with a new understanding in their eyes. The atmosphere had changed. There were no more condescending glances, no more quiet taunts behind her back. She had proven her worth not with words, but with actions. She opened one of the letters. Inside was a formal commendation from CEO Roger Benson for outstanding contributions to company safety and for demonstrating the highest level of professionalism in a critical situation. She read it once, folded it neatly, and put it away. The recognition was nice, but unnecessary. Her work spoke for itself. She turned on her monitors. Graphs began to flicker, streams of data flowing across the screens like digital rivers. She immediately dove into analyzing the new threat. The patterns were complex, multi-layered. The hackers were using a technique she hadn't seen before. A hybrid attack combining elements of phishing, zero-day exploits, and distributed denial-of-service attacks. They were good, but she was better. She began building a model of their behavior, tracking anomalies in traffic, tiny deviations that most systems would miss. She worked methodically, dissecting their strategy layer by layer. It was a game of chess, and she was already thinking 8 moves ahead. By midday, she discovered their entry point, a vulnerability in an outdated data exchange protocol with one of the company's partners, a small logistics firm in Idaho. The hackers were using this firm as a staging area, planning to penetrate Axis Dynamics' main network from there. It was clever. It would be almost undetectable. Almost. Sophia immediately sent a report to the Information Security Department with recommendations for patching the vulnerability and strengthening monitoring of all partner connections. She also contacted the incident response team, warning them of a possible attack within the next 48 hours. "They'll come through the East Coast, likely at night, when monitoring is minimal," she said at an emergency meeting convened by Michael Stone. "We have a window to prepare. We need to deploy additional intrusion detection systems and isolate critical network segments." "Are you confident in this analysis?" Michael asked. His tone wasn't skeptical, but respectful, seeking confirmation. 92% certain, Sophia replied. The patterns match their previous attacks on similar companies. They're following a script. We can use this against them. What do you suggest? A trap. We'll leave the appearance of vulnerability, but under complete control. Once they get in, we'll record their methods, identify their sources, and pass the data on to the FBI. This isn't just a defense, it's a counterattack. Michael looked at her with new respect. This wasn't just defense, it was strategy. Go ahead, he said. You have my full support. For the next 48 hours, Sophia barely left the command center. She slept snatches in the break room, surviving on coffee and energy bars. Her team, a small group of 5 analysts, worked with her on high alert. They deployed a special sandbox, an isolated virtual environment that looked like the company's real network but was completely under their control. The attack began at 2:37 a.m. on Tuesday. Sophia was at her monitor, her eyes tracking every data packet. She saw the first scan attempts, cautious probes searching for weaknesses. Then the real attack began. The hackers penetrated through a pre-existing vulnerability, thinking they were undetectable. They're inside, she said quietly into the headset. Start recording. Don't interfere. Let them think they're lucky. She watched as they moved through the sandbox, attempting to access financial databases and payment gateways. Their every action was recorded, every IP address logged. They worked quickly and professionally, but they were unaware that their every move was being monitored. 27 minutes later, when the hackers thought they had achieved their goal and started downloading the data, Sophia gave the signal. We're closing the trap, isolating all their entry points, saving all logs. The security systems responded instantly. The virtual environment was frozen, all connections severed. The hackers were cut off, their tools captured, their methods documented. They didn't even realize what had happened until it was too late. It's done, Sophia said, leaning back in her chair. For the first time in 2 days, she allowed herself a faint smile. We're handing over all the materials to the Bureau. They now have everything they need to identify the group. Michael Stone entered the command center an hour later, looking exhausted but satisfied. The FBI is already in touch. They say it's a breakthrough. With your data, they'll be able to identify the entire group. This is an international operation, Sophia. You just helped prevent cyber attacks on dozens of companies. Sophia nodded. It was good work. Clean, efficient. exactly how it should be. "The team did a great job," she said. "Everyone deserves recognition." "You deserve more than recognition," Michael said. "Roger wants to see you tomorrow. I think you should prepare for a promotion." A promotion. More responsibility, more opportunities to influence the company's security. Sophia thought about it for a moment, then nodded. "I'm ready." She returned to her desk and began writing a detailed report on the operation. Every detail, every decision, every result was documented with the same precision with which she had documented the incident with Hunter. This was her style. Facts, data, results. No emotion, no exaggeration. Simply the truth, expressed in numbers and logic. When she finally left the office late on Tuesday evening, the city was plunged into twilight. The New York streets were bustling with life, people hurrying home after work, the lights of skyscrapers flickering in the gathering darkness. Sophia walked slowly, allowing herself for the first time in days to simply breathe, to simply be. She pulled a phoenix patch from her pocket. She looked at it in the streetlight, at the silver and gold threads that formed the bird's wings. Faith through static, a motto that meant more to her now than ever. She's been through a lot. Humiliation, threats, physical confrontation. But she got through it without losing herself, without compromising her principles. She proved that professionalism and restraint are stronger than loudness and aggression. She showed that true strength lies not in dominance, but in control. In control of the situation, of oneself, of one's emotions. The corporate world could be cruel, it could be unfair, but it could also be corrected when there were people willing to stand their ground, willing to follow the rules, willing to believe in procedure and fairness. Sofia Danilova was one of those people. And now, after everything she'd been through, she knew it with absolute certainty. She knew her worth. She knew her strength. And she knew her work was far from done. There were new threats, new challenges, new battles ahead. But she was ready. She was always ready, because her faith wasn't blind. It was based on data, on experience, on results. And this faith carried her through any static, through any darkness. The phoenix rose from the ashes. And Sophia, too. Stronger, wiser, more confident. Ready for the next challenge. Ready to defend, analyze, conquer. One battle at a time. One signal in the noise at a time. The correction had been achieved. But the story continued, and she was ready to write the next chapter.